What's up, guys? Welcome to Podsauce. I am Alesha Renee.
And I'm Dax Holt.
This is your podcast discovery show. There are over 3 million different podcasts, probably more now.
Since we've started, there's got to be 3.5 million.
Literally, because this is a podcast discovery show, when Dax and I are doing our Googles and our research on the podcast that we're going to talk about on the show, you can hear other advertisements of, I'm like, damn, another podcast?
I'm like, we haven't even listened to the first 3 million. Come on.
And some of them are so good. I find myself like jotting down those titles so that I can then use them for my podcast pick of the week. But it's our pleasure to help you guys navigate those waters.
Yeah, and one of those podcasts that we're going to be spotlighting today is Trapped in Treatment. We've got the hosts of that podcast coming on. Obviously, this has been a huge podcast because Paris Hilton has been putting the spotlight on this podcast.
Yeah.
She's the executive producer, and it is about the troubled teen industry and the abuse that goes on in it. So we're going to have those ladies on here.
Yeah,
very
I'm looking
soon.
forward to getting deep diving into that. But right now, you have an odd pod pick of the week.
I like when you do
I got to
it.
give you a jingle. Odd pod pick of the week.
All right, so my odd pod for this week. Odd pod is obviously if there's a podcast out there that doesn't fit the norms, it's unusual, but gets my attention. That is what I call the odd pod pick of the week.
Some of Dax's previous odd pod picks of the week have been about walking, a man that just, which probably is really good for AMSR. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
The cereal, he had
The
a cereal
tasting
podcast.
podcast. I mean, there's so many unusual pods out there, and some of them are really, really good. And this one is crazy popular. It is called Doughboys.
Okay.
All right, so this is a podcast all about the fast food industry or chain food industry.
Krispy Kreme.
And not only that, so it's hosted by two guys, Mike and Nick, and they are foodies, like massive foodies. They love it. They can't stop talking about it, and so they created this podcast, and they will basically bring guests on, maybe comedians, well-known people. There's been a lot of famous people on this podcast, and they'll talk about some of these chain restaurants and what they love about it, what they order off the menu, and it's crazy successful. Like Judd Apatow has been on it. Who else has been? Rob Lowe went on to talk all about In-N-Out Burger. I mean, what?
As soon as you said that, I kept hearing the jingle. In it. Oh, we probably can't pay for that. Never mind. That's what our show is all about. Okay.
But I listened to an episode about McDonald's. I mean, it's just, they love it so much, and I think that there's so many other foodies out there that love talking about it. So that is why, if you're a foodie, you will love my Odd Pod pick of the week, which is Doughboys.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We have so much more coming up. This is Podsauce.
Welcome back to Podsauce. Leash, it is your time to shine.
You're
to
welcome.
Bring your heat.
You're welcome.
To give our viewers, our listeners, our audience
They are welcome.
a recommendation straight from your mouth.
They are most welcome.
What you got for us
Well,
today?
you guys know I'm really big. I'm a huge mental health advocate. I've been very open about my own journey with that. But I'm also in this space of these mean dating streets, and I need all the help to navigate them successfully so Leash can finally get it right. And I found a podcast that was so good, I actually ended up following the host of the podcast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I stumbled on it. It was one of those, Ange, our showrunner / producer, hits us every week when it's our turn to put up or shut up for our pick, and I was just like, phew, phew, phew. This one looks good. Obviously, I was in my mental health category. It is called Let's Get Vulnerable, Relationship and Dating Advice with Dr. Morgan Anderson. What I like about this podcast is, one, the level of vulnerability that she displays within this podcast. And she doesn't give her advice from a place of piety. I don't feel that there's any level of condescension. It just feels very honest, very open, very vulnerable. The episode I listened to was the keys to finding and maintaining a healthy relationship, because that's something that I have yet to conquer, right? And I wanted to know what a doctor, a therapist's perspective was on how to get there. And she introduced me to a lot of language that I wasn't familiar with, like secure attachment, how to find it, how to recognize when you're still operating from a place of trauma bonding, which a lot of my friendships and relationships in the past consisted of trauma bonding, which happens to a lot of people who have had trauma in their lives. And so this is just a really good podcast. Some of the other topics for when you feel like giving up dating, which me and M, one of our social media manager, we have talked about extensively. Sorry, M.
She's laughing.
That's her laughing
She's like,
in the background.
Thanks for throwing me under the
She's
bus,
like, thanks, Leash. You know, but sometimes you just reach those moments of where you're healthy, whole, and healed, and you have so much to give, and you just run into people who are still operating in their space of hurt and deficiency, and versus them taking themselves out of the dating game, they get into the dating game, and it just becomes a secular thing. So
I think podcasts like this, so like, a lot of times people think, oh, maybe I have to feel like I have issues or stuff going on. And I feel like these kind of podcasts are good for anyone. Just revitalizing, like making things better, improving on yourself, whether you feel like you necessarily are dealing with the same issue, that is the topic for that week.
I'm so happy that you said it, Dax, because quite honestly, that's really what it is. Because you could be in a long-term committed relationship, or you could be within a marriage, and if you're not actively working on continuously growing and being a better version of yourself. Like one of the podcast topics is dating someone who is securely attached when I'm working from being, when I'm used to being in trauma bonds, which for me was very much so a lot of my relationships. Well, no, they just were trash.
So what was it called again?
They just were pure trash. This one's called Let's Get Vulnerable, Relationship and Dating Advice by Dr. Morgan Anderson. It's a really good podcast.
Make sure you guys, if you're not watching Podsauce on YouTube, head on over to YouTube. We've got a whole video element to this show. You can find us at the Podsauce, and we got a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. It's Podsauce. Welcome back to Podsauce. Leash, it is time.
It's time. It's a good one.
We're going to turn this one a little bit more serious. You know, we're laughing and goofing, but I think this is a very serious topic that I want to get into.
Yeah.
So we are going to turn over to Carolyn Cole and Rebecca Mellinger, who have Trapped in Treatment. And this is a podcast that covers a very serious topic, and that is an in-depth look into the troubled teen industry. And you may have actually heard about this podcast because Paris Hilton is one of the executive producers on this. But ladies, welcome to Podsauce.
Thank you. We're so happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So,
Did we give an accurate description?
Yeah,
of the
did I do
podcast?
okay?
We can start there, yeah.
That was good. It is a complex topic, and so we will be more than happy to enlighten everyone on all of the nuances of this issue. But you guys did great. Great start.
Well, I think, you know, you guys talk about this a lot during your podcast, but how Paris Hilton kind of put this on the center stage of America when she did her documentary, This is Paris, and talked all about Provo Canyon School and the very tough time that she went through there, and how this is not just isolated to one school. There's many schools out there where kids are being abused and treated very poorly, and they're disguising it as, oh, we're trying to help a troubled teen.
Right.
So how did you guys decide you wanted to do a podcast really diving into this even more?
Well, so this industry has been around since the 60s and 70s. So we've seen advocates and senators try and make change within this industry, but it really wasn't until Paris came out and she kind of gave survivors a platform to say, this happened to me too. You know, my family, please look into this, please watch this with me. We can talk about my own experience. I think people had felt a lot of shame previously. And so we had actually, with Paris, gone to Utah, and we hosted a rally for survivors of Provo Canyon School. And while we were there, we just realized how pervasive this issue was, not only with Provo Canyon School survivors, but like you just said, Dax, with the whole industry in general. And so we felt like the podcast world would just be an incredible platform where other survivors could share their stories. Paris really wanted to give them that opportunity. And then also just for the general public to get an in-depth view of what this industry is and what it looks like to be a survivor.
Carolyn, Rebecca, you know, as Dax said, this is obviously a really challenging topic to discuss. So please, give us grace if we don't phrase certain questions the correct way. I want to start with, what were the ground rules given to parents who wanted to send their children off to a school like Provo Canyon?
Sure. So you have to understand that this industry makes millions, billions of dollars off of these parents. And so because there's not really been any kind of regulation or oversight of the industry, it is they have very strong marketing campaigns. So starting off when they talk to parents, it's a lot of, oh, this is the place for your child. You have to enroll them immediately or they are going to die or end up in jail. And so the parents are already on edge, feeling and having those own thoughts of their own. So when they're hearing this from a, and I'm putting this in quotes, a professional, they are so apt to put all of their trust into these kinds of facilities. And so, what the ground rules are is they will tell you right off the bat, your child is going to say that they're being abused. They're going to say that they hate it here. And that is them trying to manipulate you. Do not believe them. And so parents are already going in anticipating like, okay, they're gonna lie and say that these things are happening, and I have to hold strong because it's in the best interest of the child. And at the same time, that child is being told also by the facility, your parents aren't going to believe you. They know that you're manipulating. They know that you're lying. This is the same thing that you did at home. And so it immediately drives this wedge in between parents and their children. What's even worse now is this industry has entered this like public space where they're receiving a lot of young people from child welfare and from juvenile justice who may not have that support system, who's constantly checking in or calling or looking for things that may be happening there. So they ultimately end up getting kind of stuck in these facilities and shipped from, place to place over years.
And Carolyn, this is not just a topic for you. This was your life. You lived through going to one of these schools and suffered the abuse of it. What were the conversations? How long did it take for you to talk to your parents? What were those conversations like for you to finally say, hey, this is what my childhood was like? And how did your parents respond to that?
Yeah, so when I got home, I really didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to move on. I wanted to start my life that I had been fantasizing about for 2.5 years. And so it took me actually about 15 years to be able to talk about it. And like a lot of people who experience trauma, I don't think at that time I really understood what was happening was abuse, because I was being told that I deserved it and I was being told that I earned my place there. And so I didn't really have that context or perception to be able to know. But it's an ongoing conversation now. Even with all the work that I do, in the public space to create policy change, my family still has a really difficult time being able to own their involvement, which is hard, right? Because we love our kids. And at that time, my mom thought she was helping me. But now she knows, and it's so hard to grapple with.
I'm a father. I am very fortunate. I have very well-behaved children. I know not everyone has that in their life, and I want to know, for someone that is struggling with a child and they're trying to figure out what's best for their child, what advice can you give to a parent that is struggling, that is looking for help, but wants to make sure it's the right kind of help? What would you say? What would be the resources they should go to?
So one of our largest goals as an organization, so I'm actually the co-CEO of Unsilenced, and we are a community of survivors who have come together to create this nonprofit to create change in this area. And so one of our largest goals is to depathologize adolescence. Right? Coming of age is a very difficult time.
Right.
You are going through extreme hormone changes. You are figuring out, some of the social dynamics in our world that are very challenging for young people. And so how can we normalize some of that rebelliousness? How can we normalize kids not being compliant? That's, you're a teenager. You're not supposed to listen to all the rules. You're not supposed to make your bed. You're not supposed to, responsibility is a learned skill. And so how can we be more merciful with the young people in our lives? Our organization is also currently working on building a database of community-based resources. That is where the solution is. We've got to keep kids in their communities. We've got to make sure that we have the resources to respond to what their needs are. So if you are a parent or a young person who is going through this right now, please reach out to us. We would love, love, love to connect with you. You can find us at unsilenced.org. And all of our social media handles are just at unsilenced_now. And we would love to connect you with any resources.
It's kind of that very difficult balance also, because we're always taught to trust the medical professionals that we engage with. And in this instance, there's so many pipelines into these programs, whether it is a medical professional or it's an education consultant, or it's a transport industry that's kind of your first foray into this industry, or it's a judge. And so I would just say, do your research. And that sounds so obvious, but we're still finding parents who are reaching out to us as of yesterday, as of last week, that are saying, my kid just got sent to Provo Canyon School. I'm now just learning about all of this. I mean, it's readily available now. It's very different than it was back in the 90s when a lot of parents were also placing kids there. There's information online. Listen to the survivors, read the reviews. They're very, very telling. And what we know, it's been very well documented, is that the marketing tactics and kind of the deceptiveness of this program has allowed it to flourish for so long. But at this point, given the platform that Caroline's created and that Paris has really created, you can't not know.
Well, we are a podcast recommendation show, and so, you guys being podcast hosts and producers, are there any podcasts out there that you can recommend? Caroline, can you go first?
So I promise this is so unbiased, but I have really been listening to This Is Paris's Who podcast. So I promise it's not a plug. And tell me to say
I've been listening to Trapped in Treatment. It's great.
I know that's right.
And Podsauce, obviously.
Right. And
Yes.
So funny.
I love Pod Save America.
That's a good
We
one.
have obviously been really in depth with the political process over this last year in trying to reform these institutions. And so that has just given me a little foray. It's kind of like that, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. That was like the first thing that I watched when we were getting into this process. And I feel like Pod Saves America gives me like a little bit of that kind of special sauce into the process.
Thank you so much, Carolyn Cole and Rebecca Mellinger, host of Trapped in Treatment, which is an iHeart podcast. We love it so much. Thank you, ladies. And Carolyn, thank you so much for sharing your story and being bold and brave enough to talk about your experience to hopefully open the platform and a safe space for other kids to feel emboldened to speak about theirs. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
We got so much more coming up. This is Podsauce. Welcome back to Podsauce. We are here to give you recommendations.
That's what we do.
Podcasts, fill you in on people maybe you don't know have a podcast out
It's
there.
what we do.
That was a tee up for you.
It's what you do. Set the stage for me to shine. And one of those people would be the big fella himself, Shaquille O'Neal. He has a podcast, and we're going to drop this into a category we like to call Sneaky Celeb. Your favorites are out here creating podcasts. Some you know, some you don't. The big fella Shaquille O'Neal has a podcast. It is called The Big Podcast with Shaq. And some of his hosts, two of his hosts are actually two of my favorite people, Nichelle Turner, longtime ET host, and Spice Adams. He and I did Detroiters together. He was a former NFL player, actor, comedian. He is just hilarious.
Well, Shaq is hilarious. I could listen to a podcast all day long by Shaq because
It's a train wreck.
He is just so funny and so out there and crazy all the time, and I think that is one of the most, the best quality about him is you never know what you're going to get, but you know you're going to laugh. And Spice is hilarious as well.
Spice is a really good time. And I think what I love most about this podcast is it's three hilarious people, because people wouldn't even suspect that Nichelle, because you see her on ET and she's so, you see her on Entertainment Tonight and she's such a...
Prim and proper.
Yes.
Yep.
But she's funny. She's hilarious. Spice, for sure.
Yeah.
And seeing these three people come together to give their input and their insights on topical issues, entertainment issues, political issues is a bowl of laughs.
Sign me up.
Big laughs.
And
with
it's been
the big
going on
fella.
for a while, too.
They've been at this thing for quite some time, you know, and it's so funny, too, because he even gives insight, as Shaq is one of the biggest entrepreneurs to segue from the world of sports into, he is one of the best to ever do it outside of course, Magic Johnson. Let's just keep that a book. You know, to have so many different enterprises outside of what everyone knew them for. So this is a really good podcast. It's called The Big Podcast with Shaq.
I like it. Check it out. And by the way, want to give a big shout out to both Caroline and Rebecca from Trapped in Treatment for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
It's a tough topic, but I think that they are doing it in a really good way and spreading the word that, hey, if you're having troubles in your house, there's other alternatives. Don't just go with the first thing that's thrown at you. Really investigate before you send your kid off and potentially change the whole course of their life.
And the dynamics of your family structure, you know. So thank you so much, Carolyn, for even being as vulnerable as you were. I mean, we said this before, but we can't say it enough because it's not easy to recount trauma. And thank you all so much for hanging out with us. Please go to podsauce.com where you can sign up for our newsletter. Find us on our YouTube page at The Podsauce. Hit like, subscribe so you can get all of this.
And make sure you
that
follow
too, but you want all this.
Make sure you follow us on all the social medias as well, IG, Facebook. We're everywhere.
All the teams.
All the place. We will get you covered and get all the podcasts directly to you. That's what we do. You can find me at Dax Holt.
And you can find me at I am Alesha Renee. Until next time, guys, we thank you so much for joining us. Be good to yourselves.